I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Coaching Question Show on the Coaching Conversations podcast with Jim Knight. This show is for everyone that calls the Instructional Coaching Group home for all your instructional coaching content. These episodes are designed for everyone who desires to learn and think alongside Jim as you continue to make an impact with all the great work that you do. I'm Jessica Wise, a consultant with the Instructional Coaching Group. And Jim and I have been recently hosting monthly IC Meetup sessions where we receive a list of questions each time from all the people we get to see, and they're about all things instructional coaching. And we have decided, based on the trends that we've noticed, to honor all these great questions in some podcast episodes. So to honor all of you asking us those great questions, we have a few coming up for you. And one of them is today. And today, Jim, what we're going to talk about is something very popular on the minds of many of our learners, and that is getting started with a new school year. And once our Q&A has come to a close, we'll have an epilogue or a final note at the end of the show where I ask Jim 2 questions to wrap up our discussion before we sign off. So on with the show. Hi, Jim.
How you doing, Jessica? It's good to see you.
It's great to see you. I'm really well. I have something really fun to tell you.
Oh, do I get it now or do I have to wait?
Oh, wait. Do you want me to tell you now?
Whenever you want.
Okay. So I've started a new thing, and I think you'll find it interesting. Well, I hope you do. I've started cold plunging.
Woo!
Have you heard of this?
Were you inspired by a Christian? Is that what led you to do it?
Well, funny enough, so Chase and I, when we had a team meeting, he and I were partnered in a breakout room, and we were talking about his vacation where he did a cold plunge. And he said, it was just so cold. I said, I need to try this. And then I saw Christian's video where he just went all in. And I said, that's it. I have one in my garage. I'm filling it up. And I've been doing it now for 3 weeks, and I'm obsessed. I love it so much.
So what's in your garage? Like, how do you do this?
Okay, so it's an inflatable small tub.
A little tub, yeah.
Yes, and you fill it up with hose water. We're not fancy. We use the hose. And it only fits one person. It's very cold. You get in for about 8 to 10 minutes, and it's wonderful.
No ice?
No ice yet. I'm working up to ice.
No, you're not really cold plunging then. You're just lukewarm plunging.
Thank you for that. I think
it's
below 60 degrees. It's cold.
I don't know. Try the ice and get back to me.
Well, I'm doing the cold water plunge. I'll work up to the ice water plunge.
So do you do it up to your neck, like your whole body?
All the way up. Yes. And I sit back and listen to a podcast. It's wonderful.
Oh, I've done it when I was running a lot. And so because of I was running long distances, like, maybe 14, 16 miles. So then I would put 2 bags of ice in the tub, and then I would get in, and then I would set the timer for 15 minutes, and I'd sit for 15 minutes. But I only went up to my waist. I didn't go like all in. So, and I can't say I enjoyed it. So I'm happy to hear you're enjoying it, but it's not working for me.
Well, that's neat that you did the ice water plunge. I'm working on the cold plunge. I want my body to get used to it, but I found it very relaxing. I'm very excited about this.
Well, good. I'm happy for you. I'm not going to emulate you, but I'm happy for you. If I start to run long distances, I'll do it again.
What's new with you?
I'm just working on, my big thing right now is the concept of certainty. So I've been reading books about certainty, and certainty is actually not rational. It's emotional. It's a feeling. To feel like you're certain is the same as feeling joy or fear. And at least that's what some of the researchers say who study neurologists who study this. And the trouble with certainty is it interferes with your capacity to think carefully, because you get locked into a view of the world and you see world through your biased lens once you lock into it. And so there's another book called Uncertainty that I'm reading in combination with that. So that's been my intellectual idea this week.
How interesting. What led you to this topic?
Well, to be honest, what led me to it is I see a lot of really polarized conversations about what's best for teaching, and where people are kind of nasty, like, how could you not do what evidence-based practices are? And so you'll have big conflicts between people who believe in direct instruction and people who believe in inquiry. And they get locked into their view. And I want to say, actually, there's a space for both. Question is, does it help kids? Let's measure if it makes a difference for kids. If it's making a difference for kids, I don't care if you're teaching using chewing gum or something. Like if it works, it works. So, but I think for us to move forward, to learn from each other, we have to be careful about getting stuck in those paradigms. And as I see these big debates on social media, I feel like certainty is interfering with learning. So that's what got me thinking about it.
Oh, interesting. Well, I hope that you'll continue to talk about it because that seems like it would have implications for our work. So thank you for sharing that.
Not as exciting as a cold bath, but it's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool.
I'm certain that the cold bath has been really good for me. Feel certainty about
right.
that.
Okay, good.
Okay, you ready to dive in?
Let's go.
Okay, I'm starting with a question from Paul Hammond, and this will be our precursor for the rest of the conversation, Jim. So he wants to hear your ideas on how coaches can invest in their own professional development over the summer.
Such a good question. And here's my first thought is maybe don't do anything. When I was thick into writing my dissertation, I had so much to do, and it was just going really slowly, and I was trying to get, it was like drudgery, and and then I had a week to go out to the Canadian Rockies to see some friends of mine in Jasper, where I used to live, and I went skiing and just sort of socializing and having fun for a week. When I came back, my productivity went through the roof. So I think we're talking probably 5 times more successful at the work I had to do. And so I think it is worthwhile making sure you take a break. I wouldn't say making sure. I'm not certain about that, but I would say ask yourself, is taking a break maybe the most productive thing I can do right now? Giving yourself a chance to. It is okay to focus on gardening or learning how to create the perfect pancake or whatever. It's okay to do something completely different. Give yourself a chance to regenerate. I think, but if you're like, okay, I've had the break, but now I want to do some things, and actually I can't really break because I'm too worried about all the things I have to do. One thing would be to clarify your role, to get really clear on what you're going to do as a coach, and then develop the tools you need to be successful. It could be a playbook, could be going through the impact cycle checklist and making sure you really understand how that works, sort of planning out in your mind, what will those 8 weeks look like as I do it? Could be looking at any other kind of tools you might need in order to be successful as a coach, maybe how you're going to gather data or those kind of things. So if you went through the definitive guide and sort of tore it apart in particular, that would be probably pretty helpful. Look at what's my playbook? How do I gather data? What's the impact cycle? How do I do all those things? You could use video to work on your communication skills. Maybe you're interviewing or having a conversation with your spouse or with your kids, and it might sound goofy, but to get familiar with what you do, your little idiosyncrasies as a communicator can be really helpful. And then I wanted to mention a bunch of different books, and ironically, it's just by chance, but they all happen to be people who are keynoting in TLC. So Hae-Sun Moon's book, Coaching A to Z, I thought the title was kind of goofy, and I got it. And it's just kind of sitting there, and I was like, I should probably look at that. And then Hae-Sun was a presenter at the Growth Coaching International Conference, the annual conference. And I heard such rave reviews of her and saw her and thought she was just such a wise and kind of warm-hearted person. Well, I better read the book. And the book is great. It's really a great book. So that's one I really highly recommend. And then another keynoter at TLC. It really is just a coincidence that the book that I came to mind were the ones who are at TLC. But is Kate Murphy's book, You're Just Not Listening. It is without question the best book on listening I've ever read. I think it's just truly an outstanding book. And so
it's right beside me.
There you go. And how did that happen to you? Why is it sitting there?
I'm working through it. I'm reading it right now.
And it's great, right?
Yes, I can't wait to talk to Kate.
Yeah. And so that's that book. And then Christian Van Uerberg's, if you got this one nearby too, Introduction.
I don't. I'm out of books.
Introduction to Coaching Skills. That book, he has a 3rd edition. To me, that's an essential text for coaches. That there's so many good things in that book. I mean, he's a great friend of mine, but even if he wasn't a great friend of mine, I'd highly recommend that book. And then in our books, I'd say Better Conversations would be helpful for looking at how you communicate. High Impact Instruction would be good. And then the Impact Cycle Definitive Guide would be things to look at. And then I would say explore ways of processing the information somehow. Maybe you create mind maps of the content, or even drawing pictures, or notes that involve images, or looking at different ways of making sure that what you do is transforming the information. You're not just letting it go by, but you're doing something with the information. Maybe you write just a one-page summary of each chapter or something. And then another thing that I'm sure everybody knows, but I love it every time I do it, is that when you buy a book on Kindle, now I'm an analog person. I like to read the real book, but on Kindle, you can copy and paste. So if you highlight a passage, you could paste it into a Word document. And so you can create a little personal summary of, you can get up to 10% of the book and put it into another document. So I find that as a really helpful way of doing that. So those are my things. Take a break, clarify your role, create your tools, read stuff, consider mapping your notes. But what about you? What did you do? How did you get ready?
Well, you mentioned a couple of things that took me back to when I was a coach, and it was the relax yet still learn if you want to. Mm-hmm. So many times throughout the school year, I would come across an article or someone would recommend a book, and I would just tuck it away, or I'd flag that article in my inbox. I would save it to my reading list. And I didn't really have time to get to them. Summer was my time. It was the time to catch up on that reading list I had grown throughout the school year. But I also wanted to rest so I could go back recharge. So I think that finding a nice balance between filling your learner bucket, but also taking care of you. So many times throughout the school year, we ask people, how can I support you? What do you need from me? It's time to consider those questions for yourself. What do you need? And how can you support yourself so that you can be ready to get back to that school year? So I like the balancing the learning with the self-care or the time off or the break. I think that's really great.
I would say err on the side of taking a break.
Take a break.
I think giving yourself a chance to recharge is really, really important. And if you can only do one thing, do that. Now maybe reading a book and getting away is what you need to do to recharge. But whatever it is, you want to come back fully alive, and not you don't want to come back worn out. You want to come back energized.
You heard it here, folks. Jim Knight is giving you permission to take a break.
So is Dr. Wise.
Okay. Okay, Jim. So some of our learners talk about the very early days of back to school. Classrooms are being set up. Teachers are getting to know their students. They're getting their classrooms ready for back to school procedures and meetings. And one of our coaches, Lauren Bernstein, she was curious about how to maximize those days before impact cycles begin, when teachers are settling in. How do we maximize those days with teachers?
Well, I would say if you're still in school, maybe you're attending summer workshops or something, you can prep now. So I think before going back, to meet with people who are in workshops and saying, do you want to try this out? Do you want me to get together and sort of have things planned out for when you're going to get back to school is really, really a helpful thing to do, to prep like that. A colleague of mine, a coach who worked with us in our project in Topeka, and I've probably mentioned this before because I think it's such a cool idea, but she created a staff directory at the start of the school year, and she created it for new teachers. But she went around to every teacher and said, look, I'm creating this little document for new teachers so they know who everybody is. Could you tell me a bit about you? And I'll put it in the document. I want to take your picture. And then she said, well, I'm an instructional coach. This is kind of what I do. So whenever she went to a meeting, within about 3 days of being in the school, she knew everybody in the meeting. She'd listened to them, found out about what they were interested in, what they teach. She knew all about them. And she gave the document to other people. It was really helpful to her, this little kind of staff directory she created with photos and information. I think you have to be careful when you first go back, not to say just jump right in, and because people need a little time to get settled, but having informal conversations with people, getting to know what's happening, helping out in little ways. I think maybe looking at your instructional playbook, am I clear on what our core strategies are? Developing or refining the playbook. And I think sort of getting an organizational plan in place. How am I going to plan my week? What am I going to do? I'm not trying to sell the planner, but something like the planner we've got gives you all the tools you need as an instructional coach to organize what you're doing, but something where this is my system for organizing. Here's what I'm going to record. If it's a digital or however you're going to do it. There's virtual courses we offer people could take. I think if they haven't ever taken the Virtual Institute, that would be a good thing, or some other course like that. And then I think you need to set out how you and your principal are going to work together. So how often are you going to meet? When are you going to meet? What do you have to do? And get your grounding into everything. Here's how I'm going to organize myself. These are my teaching practices. This is how I'm going to work with the principal. This is how I'm going to connect with people at the start. All those things kind of come into play. But what did you do when you were starting? How did you handle that?
One important thing I did do is what you just said, is make sure I had a great relationship with the administration and that we knew when we'd meet. It wasn't always, we didn't always have an agenda, but we always touched base. So I think that was a really important part for me. But with the teachers, it was small wins. To be honest, that's where I was as a new coach and later as a coach who worked in many schools. I would use the first few weeks back to school to accomplish some small wins with teachers so that I could be present, so they knew that I was there for the right reasons. I would make myself very seen and very available in the classrooms, in the hallways, wherever teachers were, I was there. And just to make sure that they knew I was there for them. So what could I do to support you today? Great, let's work on that together. Or can we meet after school? I'll help you with that. So that when I did get to the point where teachers were ready to start actually looking at their teaching and they felt comfortable with their students, we could get right into the impact cycles, or we could start a coaching cycle right away, or we could begin talking about instruction. And they already had that foundation with me as their coach.
That sounds good. And it was your finding then that probably the first week is not the best time to start the impact cycle?
Probably not. Maybe not the second week either. I think giving them some time. When I was a coach very early in my career, we did the first 20 days in elementary school. That was so important and popular when I was a new coach. So that was like untouchable. You just didn't touch the first 20 days. You let people have their time to get settled in, get to know their kids. And then that was fertile time to start coaching.
Mm-hmm. You could do your one-to-one conversations maybe, but even then, that's cutting into your first 20 days. So I think getting ready, getting prepared, getting organized, working out with your principal, those are all good ideas.
I think one last thing I thought about is getting on people's calendar. When I worked really closely with my principal, she would encourage me to lead professional development. So then I could bring that into the team meetings or the grade level meetings, and we could talk more about it with teacher teams. So getting time on the calendar, when can I meet with your team, or when can we have a professional development on blah, whatever our school initiative was. I think that was my final thought of what they could do.
That's good.
Okay, another question comes from a coach named Deanna, and she wondered if you could share what the focus of coaching cycles might be at the start of the year.
Well, I think it's going to be whatever is most pressing for the teacher, and so I wouldn't want to get locked into, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But if you said what typically would be the starting point, I would say there's a couple things that come to mind. One of them would be behavior. The trouble with setting expectations for behavior and reinforcing them, and maybe even to some extent co-constructing them with kids, getting really clear at what are going to be the norms, the expectations of this community, and developing those norms and expectations. The longer it takes for those to be in place and reinforced, the more difficult it's going to be. And kids are sneaky. They're really nice for the first 5 days. You're like, man, every other year has been a real challenge, but these kids are going to be amazing. And then like week 2 or week 3, no, this is just like every other year. So the sooner you can get the expectations in place and reinforcements for those expectations, and maybe establish some goals around behavior about maybe which kids are involved in conversations or disruptions or whatever it might be, to get something in place for behavior. If you're concerned that that's going to be an issue, I would say that's a really big thing. And then the other thing I was thinking is working around curriculum. So the learning map, getting learning maps in place for instruction, which we talk about in high impact instruction, or however you're addressing the curriculum, but helping the teacher kind of plan out their lessons, think through all the things they're going to do, and maybe creating a learning maps as a way to do it, different kinds of tools like that, or even thinking about how they're going to put in place things like formative assessment and feedback, having practices for what that's going to go. But I would say either you're clarifying expectations for learning or you're clarifying expectations for behavior, but getting started, getting clear at the start is really, really key. What was your answer to that question?
Well, I thought about the instructional playbook, and I thought about schools who know what the beginning of their year might look like and how the community building like we have in the instructional playbook, how that might be a really important area for teachers to begin if they so choose. But also, like you said, the curriculum planning, because teachers want to start off every year really strong. So their kids are very engaged and excited to learn. So curriculum planning and then the community building, I see those areas. I remember those areas being very popular. We'd spend full days before the kids came with curriculum planning. We'd spend full days talking about building community and what that might look like in each classroom, in each grade level or content lead. So I agree with you.
Good. I like it.
Okay, Jim, one last question before we move into our epilogue.
Right.
It's related to back to school, but it's about the back to school jitters that coaches might feel. I remember when I was a new coach and I had my classroom that was set up without kids' seats, of course, and I didn't know what to do. I felt panicked. The bell would ring, the buses would come, kids would unload, and they'd go to their classrooms and the doors would close and I didn't have kids. So I felt very nervous about what do I do when I don't have students as a coach? So can you talk to the people who might feel what I felt and how they might get started?
Well, I think you described it beautifully. It's probably going to seem weird. Everybody is going off to their classes and you're just kind of like, well, what do I do? And I think you might doubt your decision. If you're a brand new coach, this is your first year, you might say, gee, I don't know what I did. I love having my own class. I love building a community of learners together. And I love all the things involved in teaching. And now I'm not teaching and I kind of miss it. And it might take you a few weeks to overcome that. Once you start to see the impact you can have as a coach, you're not just impacting this year's kids, it's every kid that teacher ever teaches. And you're not just doing your class, if you're doing multiple classes in the school, the impact is massive. Then it's really rewarding. And when you start to see, just like the light bulb moment in students, when you start to see teachers come alive with the successes they're having, it's incredibly motivating. But initially, it might feel weird, and that's okay. And it's going to take you a while to get used to it. But I think your job is pretty awesome. I mean, what you do is you build connections with other people and you make it easier for them to teach. And so I think bearing in mind what you're doing, how cool is it that my job is to help other people learn? And I do it in a way that helps them feel good about themselves. That's a pretty awesome thing. So I think reminding yourself, as Michael Fullan says, of the moral purpose behind what you do and just being conscious of what's happening. Sometimes we get so wrapped up in the day-to-day we don't notice. But your job is you're a learning accelerator. That's a pretty awesome thing. What's your response? How did you deal with that first 6 weeks, let's say?
A lot of self-doubt, a lot of regret. Why did I leave the classroom? A lot of what you said, actually, I feel very seen with what I experienced. But I think what I wish I would have done and what I did in consecutive years was use that time to plan, make sure that I had everything I needed to be there for the teachers. But then I also started going to classrooms. I tended just to follow the kids. Where were the kids? I want to be there. So I would go to classrooms. I would stand in the hallway and have the quick one-on-one conversations with teachers to see what was on their mind or what they would be working on in their planning meetings so I could get ready for that. And I'd use that time to plan. But what I also use that time for is touch base with my administration. My principal and I worked closely together. So did my assistant principals and I. So working with them to make sure that I knew what was coming up in professional development, that we aligned professional development with the grade level team meetings, just so there was consistency within the school. I felt like I was that teacher advocate, that I could sit in these meetings and go, okay, yes, but when we go to team meetings, can we also talk about this? So advocate for teachers. I was present in classrooms as much as I was welcomed or could be. And then I would be in the halls. If there was a transition period, I'd be in the hallway so that I could talk to teachers.
I remember when I first went to university, and in Canada, when I went to school, Labor Day was the last day of the summer holidays, and the first day of school was the day after Labor Day. And so it was the day after Labor Day, and I was going to university that year, and I was driving with my dad and somewhere, and then I was like, I'm not going. It really felt weird not to go back to school. It just felt really weird. And I think it can be the same kind of feeling when you're a coach. You can feel like, the last 20 years, I've always had a class and I don't today. This really feels like it's like you're cheating or something, getting away with something. So I think to just know you're not alone. That's the way everybody, well, maybe not everybody, but I don't want to be too certain, but Many people are going to feel the same way as you. It's probably the most common feeling that first few days of school is especially your first year. What am I doing? But to be at peace with that and do the kind of things we've talked about. I like your suggestions. I think that's the thing to do.
Wonderful. Okay, well, to close out today, Jim, I have 2 questions that remain on our topic. And one was actually inspired by one of the questions on your favorite question list. So I'm excited to share this with you. So Jessica Redmond submitted a question. I modified it to fit the question that you have. And it is, if you woke up tomorrow and every school or every system in the world was implementing effective instructional coaching, what would be one thing that coaches were doing really well?
Well, I'm going to say 2. So okay. That's okay. And the first thing I would say is I like the presupposition here that there is a coach in every school. I think it's a hard sell initially that there should be a coach in the school. It seems like we just have a person and all they do is they help other teachers learn. But if we're okay with status quo, then we don't need coaches. But if we want to keep getting better, so kids have better lives, then we need to really invest in professional development. And so my dream would be that every school, everywhere, has a coach who's facilitating the learning. And then the 2 things that I would say that would be happening is, one thing is the coach should really be treating colleagues with respect and seeing their value and their dignity and seeing their strengths. And they should be communicating all the good things they see in the person. It should feel good to be coached. So we should want to be coached just by virtue of the positive energy I get from this person who sees me and values me. I think that should come through. And then I'd say the second thing is just that coaching is being effective, which is to say the person that's coaching has a playbook. They know how to gather data, have a coaching cycle. They're working from the partnership print. They're doing the 7 success factors. And the measure of effective coaching is positive changes in students' lives, whether we're talking about engagement or well-being or achievement. There's measurable, palpable, positive differences happening in school. And when you can demonstrate that, you can show that this is really making a difference in how kids learn or how kids feel safe or belong in school, then your coaching is successful. And imagine if that kind of continuous improvement was happening in every school in the world every day. And that's my goal. That's what I'd like to see happen.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'll allow the 2 things because they were so good.
I could have said A and B.
A and B, yeah. One answer, 2 parts. That was great. Thank you for that. Okay, finally, Jim, what if people are interested in learning more about getting started with instructional coaching? How might the instructional coaching group support them?
Well, there's all kinds of things. So the website, instructionalcoaching.com, has hundreds, maybe over 700 forums, articles, videos, tools. If you just poke around the resources section, there are really hundreds of free things you can access. And just looking at the blog, if you worked your way back through the blog, like there's 7 things about the success factors, there's 7 blogs about partnership principles, all kinds of ideas, different people. The podcast that you can link to from the website gives you interviews with all of the leaders in coaching, whether it's Elena Aguilar or Zaretta Hammond or Joellen Killian or whomever it might be. Christian Van Nieuwerburg, John Campbell. And so I think the website gives you a lot of stuff. There are lots of courses you can access in different ways. Probably the one I would recommend the most is our virtual institute. It's already getting quite a few people, so it may sell out, but the virtual institute would be one that I would say would be really important as an introduction to leadership coaching we've got coming up, especially if you're interested in, if you're an experienced coach, but you want to broaden your capacity, or you're an administrator, you want to learn about it. That introduction to leadership coaching is really great. The Radical Learners website is inexpensive, and you have asynchronous courses there, just radicallearners.com. Lots of books. I talked about quite a few books you could look at. And I think most importantly would probably go to the definitive guide of instructional coaching, or however you do it, but could be just the blog, but to get clear in your mind about the 7 success factors for coaching. If you're a leader, probably to look at the Evaluating Instructional Coaching book and to say, what really are our standards for coaching? You need clarity of vision about what coaching is supposed to look like, and then use the standard to evaluate coaches and evaluate programs. Right now, the most common thing for evaluating coaches is that someone who doesn't understand coaching is using a tool that was designed for teachers, which just doesn't make any sense at all. But, we've created tools you can use, and we think you really need to evaluate. We need people understanding coaching, evaluating coaches, and you need to have clarity around the standards. So there's lots of things to do. I'd say the website, the books, the courses, lots of things you could do. What would you say stands out for you as something valuable aside from our awesome course? What would you say?
Of course, number one, come to the Virtual Institute.
Right.
I like the first 90 days Radical Learners course. I think that's a really powerful way. You mentioned asynchronous learning. It's also whenever it fits into my schedule. So I can sit down as an individual and learn about the first 90 days. It's really powerful. I enjoy Radical Learners courses, so I think I'd go there. Virtual Institute, obviously, but the Definitive Guide to Instructional Coaching, and it's a concise book with great information. I think that's a good place to go.
Yeah, and the Virtual Institute is going to be offered asynchronously very soon. So people anywhere in the world can take it. So that's coming soon.
Yes, so sign up, everyone. Well, Jim, thank you so much for our great conversation today.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm loving every minute of it, and great questions that people sent in. I know those people, and I'm very grateful to them. They're wonderful people.
Yes, thank you to all of you who submitted questions. And thank you for listening today, everyone. If you found today's episode helpful, it would help us if you liked or followed the podcast. You can also leave us a rating or a comment so we can continue to create meaningful content just for you. Thank you. And until next time, go forth and lead great coaching conversations. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jessica.